afternoon. Every year I come to South by Southwest and I talk about some aspect of interpersonal dynamics at work. And over the past few weeks, past few days, as I've told people that I'm going to be talking about workplace gossip, I get one of two reactions. One goes like this: ugh, I hate gossip, we should ban it, it's terrible, it's toxic, I never do it. The other reaction looks something like this. So I want to get a lay of the audience here. How many people fall into that first category? Hate gossip, think it's terrible, would never participate in it. Okay. All right, show of hands, how many people are like, nope, love it, sorry, not going to apologize? What? Why are you here then? No. That's awesome. How many people are completely conflicted, couldn't decide whether to raise their hand? They know they shouldn't, but sometimes they do, but they feel gross when they do. Okay, good. I got a good sense. I got a lot of gossip lovers in the room, and I have to say you're my people. But I'm not here to convince you that gossip is either great or terrible. What I do want to do is share some of the research that has been done on workplace gossip. And yes, workplace gossip has generated lots of academic research. Why is that? It's because it's about communication. It's about social networks at work. It's about how we get work done. It's also about our well-being. It's a rich topic to study. And there's a reason so many of you showed up today, because it's something all of us have some interaction with. Now, I have to thank these researchers and many more. I don't do primary research myself. However, I rely on the research of academics to help inform my work. There is a lot of research and stats and info you're going to get today. I'm going to give you this QR code right now just so you have it. This is a reading list that I put together with some of the best articles I've seen on gossip. There's a video in there as well. You can download that. If you got the QR code when you walked in, that's the same reading list, but that will, and this is brand new, by the way. This has not been launched to the world, the gossip reading list. You are some of the very first people to see it. So let's talk about, well, first of all, I think many of you know who I am, but just in case, I wrote this book called Getting Along, How to Work with Anyone, Even Difficult People. Not surprisingly, there's a lot about gossip in there. I also am the co-host of the Women at Work podcast, and I am a contributing editor at Harvard Business Review. But most importantly, I am a gossip. And I assume you are too. So here's my question, and actually I did this as an experiment. When I got up this morning, I thought, okay, I'm going to count how many times I gossip today before I get to my session at 4 o'clock. I stopped counting at 10 a.m. because it got pretty intense, and I just was like, this is too much. How many people in this room gossiped today? Okay. Those of you who didn't raise your hand, I don't believe you. Unless you have been sitting alone in your room with your phone turned off for the entire day, I just don't believe you. Most of the research around gossip shows that a huge majority of us do it. Something like 96% in one study, some other studies show 90, some show 100%. And it's understandable that we gossip. And I'll talk about a lot of the benefits of doing it. But here's my question about that 96%. Who is that 4%? Right? Who at work is not talking about people who are not there? Right? That is my question. And not only are most people doing it, but we're doing it a lot. One study showed that people were gossiping for about an hour in total during the day, which again, that seems like a small amount to me. There are some estimates that up to 65% of our chatter, whether it's at work or outside of work, is actually gossip. Which begs the question, what exactly is gossip? Right? And I want to get into the actual definition, because we all have this image of what we think it is. But in reality, it's probably something a little bit different. So it's the informal talk or exchange of information about someone who is not present. So let me ask the question again. How many of you have gossiped today? All of you should be raising your hand. You probably spoke about a speaker, you probably talked about a friend, you probably talked about your mom. All right, we all gossip. And research has shown it is an evolutionary behavior. It's how we find out information, who we can trust, who we can't. What's going to happen to the group that we're part of? Are we going to survive? Is there something we need to prepare for? The challenge is that what we think gossip is something like this. We think of rumors, we think of hearsay, half-truth, innuendo, we think of negative things we say about people, we think of toxicity, we think of cancel culture, right? We think about whispers, we think about middle school behavior. But that's not the whole story. And I want to try something out. I hope all of you are sitting next to someone you don't know very well or can find someone near you. And I want you just to take one moment, find someone you don't know, and I want you to tell them a piece of gossip. And then ask them to tell you a piece back. All right? We're going to just take 2 minutes. Go ahead. Let's come back. Let's come back. Let's chill out a little. All right, let's wrap it up. This is the danger of this exercise. This is the danger of this exercise, which is once you get people starting gossip, it's really hard to get them to stop. Okay, we're going to do another show of hands. How many people, what you heard, not what you told the other person, but what you heard, the gossip you heard, how many people would say it was positive information about someone? I'm guessing that group was a no. Okay. How many people would say it was neutral, what they heard? It was neutral. Okay. And how many people would say it was mean, negative? Okay, a lot of you didn't raise your hand. I don't think you know what you heard. But this is the interesting thing about the research. So a group of researchers they actually had people wear hearing devices. So they actually were listening in on their conversations. They wouldn't listen to them all day, but while they're awake, this listening device would turn on occasionally, record part of their conversation. And then research assistants afterwards would code that. How much of that was gossip? And then they coded that gossip for what researchers called valence. So was it positive, was it negative, and was it neutral? So this study, in sort of everyday life, they found that 80% was neutral gossip, right? My mom's showing up tomorrow. Guess what? That is gossip, but it could be negative. My mom's showing up tomorrow, right? All about tone. 13% was negative, and then the remaining 5% was positive. And I think that for me, that was really surprising. Interestingly, you might think the numbers would be a little bit different in the workplace, and they studied this slightly differently in the workplace because they talked to pairs of people. Who are your gossip partners? Who do you gossip with? And then they asked, is your gossip with that person mostly positive, mostly negative, a mix of both? And the mostly negative was the lowest percentage. Right? We think we are talking negatively about people all the time, partly because of negativity bias. It's what we remember. When someone told you that your other colleague knocked it out of the park in the meeting, you don't remember that as gossip. But if they weren't there, it was. The other thing you might be surprised about is who gossips. Now, before I share the research on this, I want you to just call to mind Bring someone into your mind who is the quintessential gossip. It doesn't have to be an actual person. But what do you think the sort of quintessential gossiper looks like? Are they old? Are they young? Are they a manager? Are they a member of a team? What gender are they? Who are you picturing? Because here's the interesting thing. We often associate gossip, in particular with women. But all of the research shows that men and women gossip equally. However, you don't believe me, but it's true. But let me tell you why. Men don't call it gossip. And when we see a man talk to another man about someone who's not there, we don't label it gossip. It's a gendered word and a gendered term. And we have to keep that in mind. And I worry that part of our negative association with the idea of gossip is also gendered. We've got to remember that. The other thing you might think is that young people gossip more, right? I have an 18-year-old. I will tell you, I love when she comes home from school, with lots of things to tell me. High school gossip is the best gossip. And they don't mind talking shit about each other. They say some of the meanest things. But the reality is that they're figuring out the social dynamics. They're figuring out who can they trust, who can't they trust. What happens when I test the boundaries? It's a form of risk-taking for adolescents to talk badly about one another and see what happens as a result. Who do I form alliances with? Right? Who do I violate their trust? What happens when that happens? What happens to our relationship? What happens to my reputation? So yes, this research does show that younger people spread more negative gossip, but check out these stats. Supervisors gossip much more than non-supervisors when you look at organizational networks. Right? So this idea that it's the young newbies in the organization stirring the pot is not always true. Supervisors are often gossiping much more. Another interesting thing is the study is how it spreads. So positive gossip spreads much more quickly. Because think about it, you say, our colleague Susan did great in that meeting. I'm certainly happy to tell everyone else in the office, guess what, I heard Susan did great in that meeting, right? Negative gossip spreads more slowly. It stays usually within cliques or in groups. Because we've learned, what my teenage daughter and her friends have not fully learned, that gossip reflects negatively on you as the gossiper. So if you're going to spread negative gossip, you're going to do that carefully, ideally. And we'll talk about that in a moment too. So let's talk about the upsides and the downsides, because there are both. I'm sure many of you, when you thought about this session, when you think about your own gossip situation, even in your conversations here today when you gossiped. Oh, actually, I meant to ask, how many of you gossiped about me? So I knew it. I knew a couple people were. I'm going to just assume it was positive, so thank you. Let's talk about the many downsides. Number one, here are things it can do. It can damage reputation and careers. How many times has a rumor spread about someone that is not true, that has gained truth? They've garnered a reputation as being untrustworthy or mean or incompetent, and they just can't shake that reputation, and it hurts the opportunities they get. It spreads misinformation. We often don't know because gossip doesn't usually come from an official source. If it did come from an official source, it probably wouldn't be gossip, whether it's true or not, and oftentimes that misinformation spreads. It also wastes time. We know it decreases morale in some situations. It hurts feelings. I'll tell you a story about that in a moment. It can also make people feel excluded, right? In groups get the information, they get the gossip, the other groups do not. And it can foster divisiveness, furthering that in-group and out-group feeling. It can also show up in your performance reviews, and this is an interesting thing about the research. people who gossip tend to have lower performance ratings, whether that gossip is negative, neutral, or positive, meaning that managers tend to not like people who gossip, probably because they like to be in control of the information and how it flows. Gossiping usurps that power structure. That's a lot of downsides. And for those of you walking in the room thinking, I hate gossip, I don't want any part of it, take a lot of pictures of this slide because this is as good as it's going to get for you. Because there are also lots of upsides, right? You wouldn't do it if it didn't have upsides. Number one, it shares critical information, especially for people who are outside the traditional power structures. And that might be the organizational structure, right? The organizational hierarchy, but it might be people who also tend to have less privilege, right? Who are disadvantaged in the organization. They get access through gossip to important information. It also grants you informal influence. Information is power. If you have information that others don't, they now see you as someone with a little bit more authority. They see you as someone who is maybe better connected than they first assumed. You also help to set and reinforce norms. Gossip is an amazing behavior control. And I'll tell you the story about my daughter, actually. She got her driver's license last year. She was one of the only kids in her friend group to have her driver's license, so she started driving a bunch of kids to school. And her one friend, who lives right down the street, I'll call him Nate, is always late. We'll call him Late Nate. So her friends all show up at our house, they get in the car, and then they drive over to Nate's house, and they sit out front and wait. And you know what they do while they wait for Nate? They talk badly about how Nate is always late. Right? They're gossiping about Nate. And guess what? No one else in that car is ever late. Because they have learned that if you show up late, people are going to talk about you. Now, I will say, to my daughter's credit, when Nate gets in the car and says, I'm so sorry, they're like, that's okay, we were talking shit about you. All right? Doesn't seem to work on Nate, but it works on the rest of the group. And this is what we know from the research, is that the more we talk about what's allowed and not, what's permissible and not, what's rewarded and not in an organization through gossip, the more likely people are to stick to those norms, to adhere to them. So if you talk about how someone was terrible in a meeting, they were dismissive, they talked over people, the people who you're gossiping with now know that's a norm that's not allowed to be violated in your organization. It also encourages cooperation, again, partly because we have that informal influence, but also because we are encouraging better behaviors, and it fosters social connection and bonding. There is actually a little bit of rush of endorphin you get when someone says, oh, have you heard? Oh, I forgot to tell you, right? That we now feel stronger, we feel more connected with that other person. It's an important bonding. Now, and I want you to remember when we look at these upsides and downsides, oh, actually, this is a really important one. Let me get back there. It also reduces stress and anxiety because it is a form of venting, right? If we only spoke about things that we were supposed to speak about in the workplace, we would feel bottled up. There would be a lot of things we wouldn't understand. And while the research doesn't show this, one of the things I really believe is that gossip also helps us make sense of the world around us. Because sometimes people tell us things. There's an official announcement. We go to the all-staff meeting. The CEO says X, Y, and Z. And then you got to gossip to figure out, what the heck did that mean? What does it mean for our organization? What does it mean for our department? Are we hiring, or are we laying people off? I don't understand. Right? So we make meaning out of the gossip as well. So now, regardless of the upsides and downsides, we still all engage in it. And I'll give you a slide that has both on it, because who doesn't want both on it? It's the more balanced view. While you're taking a picture of this one, let me just also tell you that we often worry people are talking behind our backs. right? We're made to feel that that's a really bad thing. But let me tell you about the biggest compliment I ever received in my career. My podcast co-host, I host a podcast called Women at Work. My co-host is also named Amy Bernstein. And one time when we were recording something, she said, you just leave a trail of goodwill in your wake. It's a really nice thing to say, right? Like I, in my darkest moments, tried to remember her telling me that. Do you know how she knows that? Because of gossip. People told her. She doesn't track me as far as I know. She hasn't listened in on every conversation. She hasn't shown up to every meeting I've gone to, but people have talked behind my back. And that is a good thing. We want people to talk behind our backs. We want them to say how good we are at things. We want them to say, is she ready for that promotion? I think she is. Did you hear how she spoke to that client? Did you hear how she handled that tricky customer? We want that. So, of course, I'm sure you're left with this question, with that list of upsides and downsides. Should I or shouldn't I? I'm not sure I'm going to convince all of you gossip lovers to stop, nor will I try. But my answer is yes, but cautiously. And this is where I want to give you some guidelines on how to actually gossip in a way that is ethical, that is productive, and that you can help make you sure you can sleep at night, all right? So number one, as much as possible, keep it positive. Spread positive gossip about the people who you want to lift up. It's a way of being an ally, in fact, is to talk positively behind someone's back. At the very least, keep it neutral. Now, I'm not going to tell you you're not going to never say anything negative about someone. If you do, I want you to make sure there is no trace of that. And I will share a cautionary tale on this. I had a client many years ago who, let's call Sarah, who I did not agree with on anything, nor did I really like her. And so when she would send me emails, I would forward them to my colleague, and I would say all the things I wish I could say to Sarah, and I would talk about her, and I would say, it was gossip. At the time, I thought it was venting, but it was really just gossip. And then one time, instead of forwarding, I replied. And Sarah heard every piece of gossip that I was talking about. I mean, and it was like there was a trail of emails. Like it wasn't just that email. That is not how to gossip, I just will tell you right now. And if you don't remember any story or anything I tell you today, just remember that is that do not do it. And I hear people talk about, oh, I was in the chat in our Zoom meeting or our Teams meeting, I was saying this and that. I'm like, don't do that. That is written down, that could be found. Now, if you're going to speak positively about someone, sure, absolutely. But don't leave any trace, especially if you're going to be mean. I don't want you to be mean. That's my first choice. But if you're going to be negative, make sure it's not discoverable. You also want to know your source and know your recipient. So if you are choosing to spread gossip that you heard, make sure it comes from a reliable source, right? This is how we avoid the misinformation. Ask a few questions. How did you find that out? And know who you're sharing it with. Know if there's someone who's going to just go ahead and tell everyone, or if they're going to keep it to themselves. And then lastly, this is really important. Make sure you watch your tone, right? Saying, did you hear Stephanie's getting a promotion? Is very different than, did you hear Stephanie's getting a promotion? Right? The tone changes everything. And that it also means that your intention matters. What are you intending behind the gossip? Right? Are you intending to hurt someone's feelings? Are you intending to make yourself look better? Are you intending to share information that could be helpful to this other person? Are you trying to figure out what's going on? Is it curiosity that's motivating you? Be clear about your intention before you speak the gossip. Know what is motivating you. I saw this outside the convention center yesterday. I think it's a promo for a movie or a show or whatever. This is not a good intention. So I want you to be careful. And I also want to make sure, I'll go back. I see some of you trying to take a picture. It's outside the convention center right now. You can take your own picture too. There's also a few things I want you to avoid. Personal content. It is not nice to talk about someone's personal life, right? That is something really that should be off limits. Reputational content, meaning something that could damage someone's reputation. Now, if you want to boost them, if you want to promote their reputation, by all means. But something that's going to take someone down, that's something I want you to watch out for. And I don't want you spreading hearsay and half-truths. Now, it is okay to say, I heard this, I have no idea if it's true, please take it with a grain of salt, right? Because sometimes that information can be helpful to someone. But make sure that you label it, you're transparent about how much you know and how much you don't know. I also want you to beware that there are risks in gossiping. Not just the downsides I just shared, but there are risks to you as an individual. Number one, what we know from research is when you look at the three entities in gossip, right? There's the person sharing the gossip, the person listening to the gossip, and the person being gossiped about. Who looks the worst when you're spreading negative gossip? Your assumption would be the person you're gossiping about. In fact, the person who is most harmed by that gossip is the person who spreads the gossip. People start to wonder, ooh, are you talking about me behind my back? Right? Are you trustworthy? Can I share information with you? So you need to be aware of that. The second risk is something called confirmation bias, which you are probably all familiar with, which is that if I gossip with my friend about how Mike from finance is passive aggressive, guess what? Every time Mike from finance does anything, now it looks passive aggressive. We are gathering evidence for that theory. So we need to be careful that our gossip is not feeding into that confirmation bias. The third is negativity bias. Again, we are drawn to things that are more negative. And if you and your friends start gossiping about how this is a terrible place to work, they treat us poorly, it's going to continue to feel that way. So you also need to make sure you're not just venting. You're not just spreading rumors, but you're asking, can we do something about this? We'll talk about that in a moment. So let's talk about a couple scenarios. Number one, what if someone comes to you with negative gossip? And you've come to this talk and you're like, ooh, Amy told me to keep it positive. What should I do? Well, here are a couple reactions or responses that you could say. Number one, if they're talking about someone who's not there in a negative way, the very first question should be, have you told them? Have you given this feedback to them directly? Chances are they're going to say, no, I can never do that. And that's okay. But you've set the stage that we value direct feedback around here. That I'm not just going to listen to you vent, but that I want you to be proactive in trying to resolve the underlying problem. You can also say, that sounds like gossip. Label it. Make sure they understand that you know exactly what's going on. You can also say, how do you know that's true? Check the source. Where did they get that information? If they're saying something negative about someone and you actually don't agree with that, you can also counter that by saying, that's interesting, I have a different experience. My experience is this, right? Counter the negative gossip so that you're not allowing that continue to spread. And I will tell you, I have been in the situation where someone has gossiped to me about someone who wasn't there in a negative way, and I chose to stay silent. And guess what got spread? Amy agrees with me. So if you choose to stay silent, that is going to be interpreted as agreement. If you don't agree, make sure you state that. So that doesn't become part of the rumor mill. And then the last possible response, and you might have all these responses in one conversation, is interesting, what do you want to do next? Trying to make sure that you give them some agency. How are you going to handle this situation? What are you going to do differently? What are you going to do to address the underlying issue that is causing this gossip? The goal here, you can see, is to make sure that you're encouraging people to take action as opposed to just vent. Because I, for a long time, in all my work around difficult conversations and conflict, advised people to vent before they got into the difficult conversation. I thought it helped release emotions, they made them less stressed, they would show up calm, cool, and collected. And then I read research that shows it actually does the opposite. Oftentimes when we vent, especially to someone who agrees with us, it builds up that negative emotion. That because of that negativity bias, because of that confirmation bias, we feel worse. And we go into the conversation not set up. All right, let's talk about another common scenario. What if the gossip is about you? Been there. And I will tell you another story. I actually had a colleague, let's call her Suzanne. So her real name always pops into my head as I'm about to tell the story. We're going to call her Suzanne. Suzanne worked at this organization or this company I worked at before I did. She left about a year before I joined. I was doing really well at the company. I got 2 promotions in 1 year. It was a really great fit for me. About a year into being there, Suzanne came back. It was a lovely place to work. She wanted to return, and we got put on a project together. And I was so excited because there had been so much positive gossip about Suzanne. How great she was, how much of a mentor she was, how she made projects fun. But immediately I got the sense Suzanne did not love me. And within about 2 weeks of being on that project, another friend of mine came to me and said, you know, Suzanne's talking about you behind your back, right? She's saying you don't understand the client, that you're actually really unsure of how to handle things, and so you ask a lot of questions, you're holding meetings up, and ultimately, if the project fails, it's going to be because of you. I did not like hearing that at all. In fact, it hurt. Because I actually was hoping Suzanne was going to be a good colleague. She was going to be a good partner. I was going to learn from her. And there she was undermining me. So what did I do in response? I gossiped about her. I'm going to tell you that I'm not proud of this. I actually told everyone, no, if the project fails, it'll be because of her. She's not pushing back on the client. She's just agreeing with everything they say. I actually started this whole counter campaign of gossip against her. It was terrible. Nothing good came of it. Suzanne and I still to this day do not speak to each other. And I do not want you to be in the same situation. So if the gossip is about you, number one, be okay with feeling negative. It hurts. It stinks. Right? Be okay with that. Ask the source. I wish I had asked the friend who had come to me, is it okay if I talk to Suzanne about this? Because she had told me, I have to tell you something, but you can't tell Suzanne, right? But I wish I had said, could I please talk to Suzanne about this? If this is who you heard it from, I need to address it. Then I wish I had gone to Suzanne and said, can we talk about not why are you talking behind my back? We probably would have gone to that eventually, but instead the content, right? I heard you think I'm not doing well with the client. Can I hear the feedback directly from you? What do you think I should be doing differently? Right? Take it as a feedback moment. Trust me, you're going to want to go in there and be like, stop talking about behind my back. These things are not true. But first, talk about the content, because maybe there's some truth in there that could be really helpful to you. And then you can talk about, next time, I hope you'll come to me. Avoid retaliation. Do not do what I did with Suzanne and start gossiping about her in response. That is not going to help. And you also need to be careful, because sometimes, as in this case, the rumors that Suzanne spread about me showed up in my performance review. Right? These rumors start to become true. And I thought that retaliation would really help protect me, but it didn't. And when I got my performance review and I said to my boss, I think some of this is based on hearsay, he said, well, why didn't you come to me earlier and tell me what was going on? So make sure your good work is known. Make sure that people know what your superpowers are, so that any rumors that might be spread about you, don't undo those. because you really need to protect yourself in this process. How many people in the room are managers? Okay. I got some advice for you. Managers notoriously, at least in the research, seem to hate gossip. They evaluate people who gossip more with lower rankings, with lower evaluations. They often try to stop it. As someone who writes about difficult conversations and conflict, I get asked from managers all the time, how do I end gossip on my team? And I say, good luck with that, because if you ban gossip, guess what they're going to gossip about? Your ban on gossip. So don't try to ban it. Accept that it is part of what happens in organizations. In fact, make sure you are paying attention to it. Don't punish people, especially those who spread positive or neutral gossip. Negative gossip, I understand, that's worth a conversation. But don't punish people who are spreading good information, neutral information about what's happening in the organization, about decisions that the leadership team is making. And address the underlying issue. If you are paying attention and you're hearing gossip that so-and-so is not happy with so-and-so, or that so-and-so is incredibly difficult to work with, get to the bottom of it. Because there is probably an issue that needs to be addressed, whether it's a performance issue, whether it's a communication issue, whether it's an issue around psychological safety. And normalize direct feedback. And when I say normalize, don't say, hey, you guys go ahead, give each other direct feedback, meaning model it. Ask people for feedback. When people give you feedback, don't clam up, but listen, ask more questions, and show that you're willing to act on it. And most importantly, do as much as you can to build psychological safety, so rather than gossiping, people can say what they're feeling, what they're concerned about, directly to you, right? Following these rules will create a much stronger, more direct culture on your team, and hopefully make sure that most of the feedback is more positive and neutral than negative. Now, I would like us all in this room to think of gossip as a source of information, right? Not a toxic way of communicating, not something to be banned, but as a source of information. And sometimes we have to ask ourselves, is that information helpful? Is it not? Where did it come from? Do I trust it? Do I want to act on it? Right? Be thoughtful about it, because it's a valuable source of information. In fact, here are some really interesting things I learned from gossip throughout my career. This list was really hard to narrow down because I had like hundreds and hundreds of things. So number one, I learned that my manager liked how I handled an upset client. That was great gossip. I loved that gossip. I also learned that another company I was working for was going to do layoffs. Guess what? I was able to get my resume in order. It allowed me to start networking to make sure I was prepared. I also heard that the head of another department gets really mad if you interrupt him, which is great information to have. So I would never interrupt him. I do interrupt people probably more than I should, but I knew that now I shouldn't. I also learned that the CEO posted something weird on LinkedIn, which allowed me to go to LinkedIn, read the post, figure out if I thought it was weird, go back and gossip with the other person about what made it weird. And actually, underneath the weird post was a lot of information that was really helpful to the project that we were working on. And we made sense of that through our conversations, which were indeed gossip. I also learned that my boss hates cheese. Now you might say, that's silly gossip. Why would anyone share that? You know what? You plan dinners all the time. You go out to eat with your colleagues. Knowing my boss hates cheese is helpful. Should she have told me that herself? Absolutely, that would have been helpful information, but I got it through gossip. Think about all of the useful information that you've gotten throughout the years that would help you, that has helped you in knowing who to trust, who you want to cooperate with, who to set boundaries with, how you can push a project forward, right? That's what I want us to think of gossip as. Now, I'm going to take some audience questions, but before that, I do want to give you all something for free, because who doesn't like free stuff, which is a PDF based on my most recent book, Getting Along. It's called The 9 Principles for Getting Along with Anyone. And while you're accessing that, that link will also ask you a few questions about this talk. But while we're doing that, if you haven't had a chance yet to put in your questions about gossip, workplace dynamics, please do that. And I'm going to start with a question, and I'll just take a few questions before we wrap up. And I do have something else at the end I want to share. But so this first question is anonymous. I gotta love it. The anonymous gossip is really good. All right, anonymous. If gossip is inevitable, should organizations be proactively creating spaces where employees can express concerns openly rather than behind closed doors? So there's 2 parts to this question, anonymous. Thank you for this question. Number 1, if gossip is inevitable, the assumption is that the gossip is expressing concerns. So one, I'm not sure specific spaces for positive and neutral gossip is necessary, because it shouldn't be damaging to the organization or to other people. But if you are hearing in that gossip that there are concerns about how the organization is run, that there are concerns about certain people, right, then I absolutely think there should be ways that people can express that, whether that's through anonymous surveys, whether that's through listening sessions, whatever that is. It's imperative that organizations create spaces where leaders create spaces where they can hear what's really on people's minds, right? That's really important. This second question is, how do you see gossiping related to power in the workplace? There's a lot of great research on this. Alex, thank you for this question. There's a lot of great research about the connection between power and gossip. Number 1, people with less power, it's often a way for them to get information, as I mentioned earlier. It's also certain, a lot of people who gossip say they gossip because it gives them power. And interestingly, there's been some research that shows that negative gossip, or negative comments at all, we tend to afford people, like pessimists or naysayers, we tend to afford those people more authority and more power than people who are more positive. So we have to keep that in mind as well, is that oftentimes people will gossip negatively because they think it makes them look powerful, makes them look like they have influence. The more we encourage that, the more we're going to see more of that negative gossip. We have another question from Anonymous. How can employees push back against a culture of toxic gossip when leadership isn't addressing it? So I'd go back to the slide where I mentioned all of those responses you can have to when someone shows up with negative gossip to you, right? When they come to you wanting to share that negative rumor, talk poorly about someone, your leader or the organization, right? Have you told them? Is a good question. What do you want to do about it, right? As an individual, you can push back in that context of that conversation, even if you can't change the entire culture of an organization. And I think there's actually a concept here that can be really useful called microcultures, which is that we often feel like we're subjected to the overall organizational culture. There's nothing we can do to change it as individuals, especially people who don't have authority or power in an organization. But what you can do is create a microculture. That might be just you and one other person, or you and a small group of people. And I want you all to decide, how are we going to interact with one another? What are we going to do when it comes to gossip and rumors? How are we going to treat one another? Because that will actually protect you from some of the negative effects of the larger culture. Now, will it completely? No. But oftentimes what I've seen happen in organizations and what people who are researching these microcultures say is that the positive benefits of that microculture serve to buffer your well-being, your stress level, and also at some point can actually become contagious. So if people start to see, oh, I like how that team's interacting with one another, they're not falling into the toxic rumor mill, or they're not actually treating one another with disrespect. So they start wanting to do that themselves as well. Ali asked a question, how does gender and other identities affect how we view the gossiper? As mentioned earlier, we tend to think of when women spread information about others who aren't there, we think of that as gossip. And when we see men do it, we often think of it as information sharing. So absolutely, the identity of the person will change how we think of the gossiper. And we have to be very careful when we're thinking about what's positive, what's neutral, what's negative gossip, and when we're evaluating that we're not letting our bias show up in that evaluation, right? If we think of gossip as the sharing of information, we want to be as neutral as possible in evaluating depending on who's sharing that gossip. We don't want to let our biases negatively impact that. Last question, and then I have one more thought for you before we wrap up. And this question is from Anonymous. My leader doesn't engage in neutral gossip, and so me and my colleagues are always the last ones to know about stuff in the company. How can I say it's important? Well, send them the reading list, first of all, that I gave you. Hopefully that research will convince them of a lot of the upsides. But this is one of the problems of refusing to engage in gossip, especially neutral gossip, or refusing to play in what we often label negatively as office politics. When you are outside the information loop, you are not getting access to the information that you need. Oftentimes, you're the last to know, just as our question asker experiences. Telling someone that we need this information, maybe even using an example where you were the last to know about something and saying, okay, we were the last to know about this. Had we known about this 2 weeks ago, we could have done X, Y, and Z. It's so much more helpful when you're giving feedback, especially to a manager, to couch it in what is a goal that that person wants to achieve. So if that person is really interested in making a name for your department and elevating the department's status, you can say, you know what, talking to other people, finding out what's happening in other departments and sharing that with us so that we can then respond or be proactive about our reputation will help you get to that goal. So you want to share the positive benefits of gossip and explain exactly how it will help them. Okay, that's the last question I can take because of time, but I do want to wrap up with one final thought. I'm not sure that I have convinced those of you coming in hating gossip to love it. I'm not sure I've convinced those of you who came in loving it to do it maybe a little more cautiously. I hope I have. But I do want you to remember that we gossip because we are human. It is a natural human behavior that has helped us over time survive and to thrive. So you may still decide, I love gossip, or you may decide, nope, I absolutely hate it, and I don't really care either way. What I do care about is that we don't degrade gossip as something that is horrible, shameful, beneath us. Because if gossip is human, I worry that trying to ban gossip or trying to make people feel embarrassed for engaging in it is another way in which we deny our humanity at work. Another way in which we pretend we are not human when we go into the workplaces. So gossip or not, what I do want to encourage you to do and what really matters to me is that when you walk into the workplace, open your laptop, show up at a client, go to the coffee shop where you work every day, whatever it is, I want you to remember you don't leave your feelings outside that door or in a different place. You don't leave your identity. And I want you to make sure that you treat yourself and all of the other people around you as humans. The complicated, messy humans that we all are. So thank you.